Welcome to today's training. Today we're going to be covering DACA renewals. Thank you so much for volunteering for the event. My name is Adonia Simpson. I direct the Family Defense Program at Americans for Immigrant Justice. And today we're going to talk about what's happening with the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, the renewal process, red flags, and the event that we'll be hosting on November 23rd at Miami-Dade College North Campus. So without any further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started. So first of all, you all might have questions, or you might engage with people that have questions as far as what is going on with DACA. As many of you know, there was a decision by the administration to terminate the program, but we saw lawsuits across the country which enjoined the termination enjoined the termination of DACA. So on November 12th, we had the oral arguments before the Supreme Court, and experts are really uncertain about what's going to happen. A few things could happen for the future of DACA. We do anticipate a decision in around summer of 2020, but there's a few things that could happen with the Supreme Court. First of all, they may conclude that they have no authority and that they cannot review the Trump administration's decision to terminate DACA. This wouldn't be good news, because then the program would terminate and it'd be really up to the administration on what that would look like. The court could conclude that it can review the administration's decision to terminate the DACA program and rules that the termination was unlawful, which would be a huge win and great news for DACA recipients across the country. The third option is that the court could conclude that they can review the decision, but then decides that the termination was lawful. So with the first and third outcomes, it would really be up to the administration to see what the termination looked like. It could be a few different things. It could be abruptly ending DACA and work authorization for everybody, or just letting it phase out as far as letting people's time with their work authorization and DACA status to continue and just not be able to renew. So we're going to be staying tuned, but right now the messaging is DACA recipients should really try to renew to try to get as much time as possible, since the future of the program is very uncertain. As you all may know, DACA renewals, we're still able to do renewals for people that have DACA, but unfortunately anybody who's a first-time applicant at this point is not able to submit an application, nor are people with DACA able to travel under advanced parole. So those are the updates with DACA, so just in case you get some questions on that. So the process for the day. So we're going to be doing two things on Saturday. First of all, we're going to potentially be completing DACA applications for renewal or reviewing those applications, but also very importantly, we're going to be screening DACA recipients to see if they have some alternative form of immigration relief. You know, as you may know, DACA does not have any direct pathway to permanent residency and eventual citizenship, so we do want to see if DACA recipients may have other alternatives and options available to them. So there's a separate training which we can make available to you about the screening process. We'll be sharing that link separately, but please make sure that you watch that, because depending on the day, you may be helping complete DACA applications, or you may be helping complete screening forms. So as I mentioned, there's a few different rules for the day. We're going to have people, if applicants come in who have not completed any of the paperwork, individuals may be helping with completion of all the forms for renewal. Other individuals may be helping with completion of the intakes. And then we're going to have attorneys that are conducting expert review, both of the DACA application and of the intake, to identify any other sort of relief. Finally, we're going to have an exit station, and the exit station will be doing providing resources, know your rights information, referral information, but also potentially doing Freedom of Information Act requests for any applicants that may need that completed for them. So that is the roles and the process for the day. Thankfully, Forward.us, our partner, along with Flick and Catholic Legal Services and Miami-Dade College, Forward is actually providing scholarships to 40 individuals, which is fantastic news, because later on we're going to talk a little bit about what's happening with fees. So we really encourage people to file their DACA renewals soon before there's an increase in the filing fees. So in order to renew your DACA, you must not have departed the United States on or after August 15, 2012. Individuals must have continuously resided in the United States since they have submitted their initial DACA request. and they can't have been convicted of any felony, significant misdemeanor, or 3 or more misdemeanors. If any of these facts apply to somebody that you're intaking or that you're completing the DACA application forms for, the renewal forms, you really want to flag this. An attorney needs to really take a look and make sure they're providing advice. We never want to submit any application where an applicant may not be eligible. In the current climate that we're at, it could cause a denial, potentially a notice to appear. It could create a lot of problems. So we want to make sure any renewal applications that are being submitted are those where there are no issues or red flags. And if there are issues or any red flags, we want to make sure it's being addressed by an attorney. So generally, we advise people that they should apply 4 to 5 months before their DACA their employment authorization is going to expire. Given the current state of DACA, this is a lot more flexible. We see a lot more people applying that are way far out of that, just because they want to ensure that they have the most time possible come summer of 2020 and the decision from the Supreme Court. So as you see here on the slide, individuals who are in school at the time of initial DACA don't need to show that they've completed any programs or any sort of progress in school. When you're completing the forms, and we're going to go over some of the forms here in a little bit, there are some sections that don't apply to applicants that are renewing their DACA. So those are sections that you do not have to complete, such as travel information and education information. So make sure when you're completing the form, you're really reading every part and not completing anything that's not necessary for renewal. And again, if this is a renewal application, as these all will be, there's no need to submit any documents that were previously submitted. Any additional documents that would be submitted or anything about any new criminal information or immigration proceedings. And if that's the case, you're going to want to make sure it's being reviewed by an attorney. Generally, according to USCIS, their processing time is about 3 to 4 months. In our office, we've actually had some DACA renewals being processed in more like 2 months. So they've been surprisingly quick when it comes to processing these applications. But according to USCIS, it could take up to 4 months. All right, if we do have any applicants that have been arrested or had a conviction since their last renewal application, we really want to be extremely careful with that. So we want to make sure that we're getting all of the certified court dispositions, with the exception if we don't want applicants going in if they potentially have a warrant. We may want to do something called an FBI background check just to see what might be attached to their fingerprints. We want to be really, really cautious with this. Again, we don't want to submit any application that could potentially put an applicant at risk of any sort of enforcement. So this would be a big red flag that needs to be brought to the attorney's attention upon review if there's been any new arrests. Similarly, if the applicant was in removal proceedings or currently in removal proceedings, it needs to be reviewed to see what's actively happening. Has the case been terminated? Has relief been granted? If there's been any sort of developments since the last application, since the last renewal application, we want to make sure that we're updating immigration accordingly. So here's some best practices. When you're completing a DACA application, it's always a renewal application. It's always really helpful to have prior applications for review purposes. But don't just take that and copy all the responses. It's important to really review it. A lot of times we've done applications where when we sit down and ask the questions, we actually see differences between, in responses from previous applications. And if that's the case, we want to pay special attention and explain why there's any discrepancies. If there's any inconsistencies on previous applications with the current responses, flag it for the attorney so the attorney can determine the best way to address that so there's no issues for the applicant. But definitely having the prior application is extremely helpful and is going to save you a lot of time when it comes to completing the forms. So other really big important tips is you always want to make sure you're using the latest version of the immigration forms. They get updated frequently. So here on this slide, I've actually hyperlinked, and we can share the actual presentation with you separately from this recording. But we have the hyperlink to the actual forms that are going to need to be completed. So the first one is the 824D. Here we go. Sorry, guys. So this is the actual DACA application. It's been updated recently. So if you've helped with DACA renewals in the past, you know, take your time, make sure you're reviewing it, make sure you're asking every single question. I just wanted to scroll down to the portion. Let's see, that was, as you see here, it says part 1 for initial and renewal requests. Pay attention to that. That's where it's going to show when it applies to renewal cases or when it's only required for initial cases. All right, so jumping back to the presentation, here we are. Okay, oops, sorry. So you're going to complete the 821D, the DACA application in its entirety, and have the client sign at the end. We'll have people floating around to provide assistance or if you have any questions during the form completion process. Also, individuals are going to want to complete the I-765, which is the work authorization application. And here that is, as I mentioned, it's hyperlinked in the presentation. The code for DACA renewals is C33, and sorry, this form recently was updated, and I'm just looking for where that's at. Here we go, your eligibility category. So that's where you would put the DACA eligibility category of C33. All right. Next, another form that's required only for DACA applicants, which is always kind of interesting, is the I-765 worksheet. And that's where the DACA applicant has to justify why they need the work authorization. Generally, it's a couple sentences like I'm in school or I have a family and I need to be able to work to support my family. It's just a couple of sentences expressing the need for work authorization. If you have questions when you're working through that, make sure to raise your hand and ask one of the floating experts for assistance. All right, so again, review every question and make sure that the forms are complete and every box that is needed to be checked is checked. Things with immigration right now can be incredibly frustrating. We have seen a lot of applications get rejected because there's been some information missing. So make sure everything is checked. It's so critically important because the last thing we want to do is have an application rejected and then have to resubmit it. Worst case scenario is they would actually accept an application and potentially deny it because the information was not properly completed. But so make sure that every question is reviewed. Make sure that you're asking the questions. Don't just assume the answer based on previous DACA applications. At the end of all the forms, there's a section for preparer information. So what we're asking you to do at the event on Saturday is put your name and then AI Justice's contact information. And you can indicate that you are a volunteer. You would put volunteer AI Justice, and we'll provide the contact information. So a general email address, phone number, and address that you'll be including on the form. All right, so before the client would go over to the attorney, if you're helping complete the forms, you're going to help package everything and make sure everything is complete, make sure all forms are signed, that the client has signed the forms, that the preparer has signed the forms. If you also served as an interpreter, in addition to helping prepare the forms, make sure that you're putting your information as an interpreter and signing. We're looking for 2 passport photos, a copy of the front and back of the previous or current work permit. The filing fee is $495, and that's the EAD, the employment authorization fee, plus the $85 biometrics fee. As I mentioned, through Forward, we are going to have scholarships for that nearly $500 fee, which is phenomenal. So hopefully the clients aren't going to have to pay that, but they will need to attach the check made out to the Department of Homeland Security in the amount of $495. As I mentioned earlier, just briefly, there's been a proposal to raise the fees, the USCIS fees, and there's going to be a substantial increase. They're now going to have a fee attached for the actual DACA application, whereas now the fee is for the employment authorization and biometrics. They'll be adding a fee for DACA, and this is under the proposal. It's currently under comment. It's on a comment period for another couple of weeks. But we do anticipate that that filing fee should be going up. So individuals should really keep that in mind and consider applying, reapplying and doing their renewal sooner rather than later before the fees go up. And this is the address that the applications would be mailed to. It's a PO box. We really recommend that individuals mail it flat rate. We'll have flat rate envelopes at the event on Saturday. And the flat rate's great because you can track it and and confirm delivery. Clients should also keep a copy of anything, the final version of anything that they file for their own records. They should have a copy of everything that they have. If they don't have previous applications, this is an opportunity where we might want to do a Freedom of Information Act request. I think it's extremely important for any immigrant to have a complete copy of their immigration file and know what information immigration has. So there's the application. They should keep a copy for themselves, mail it flat rate. All right. And then the last thing, you may get some questions about what happens next. When we do DACA renewals, generally the DACA youth are really savvy as far as the process. Generally, they're able to complete their own applications, and they've done so a few times. But just in case, it's good to remind people what the process is from here on out. So once the application is accepted by USCIS, they'll be issued a receipt notice. That receipt notice is really important because it has the case number. If there's any reason to do any follow-up, they can use the numbers on that receipt notice to inquire about their case. It can take a couple weeks to get the renewal notice. I would recommend anything outside of, if it takes more than a month to get a receipt notice for the DACA, they should really follow up, make sure that they're checking their flat rate delivery confirmation to make sure it was received by USCIS, doing a phone call. Anything outside of a month might be reason for concern. But once the receipt's noticed, they will then be issued subsequently a biometrics notice, which is the fingerprint appointment notice. As I mentioned, the DACA applicants have been through this before, so this shouldn't be a surprise. So usually a couple weeks after the receipt notice, they'll have an appointment to get their fingerprints done. If for any reason they miss the appointment or they can't go to the appointment, there's instructions on the biometrics notice that explains how to reschedule it. Generally, as I mentioned earlier, processing can be a few months. It can be, for some individuals, it's been really quick, under 2 months. I would get, if the application is pending for more than 6 months, it would probably be good reason to follow up with immigration through the customer service line to check on the status. If there's any issues, they should definitely follow up with an attorney or a Department of Justice accredited representative. So for example, if there's a request for evidence issued to get more evidence or information, individuals should definitely follow up and make sure they're getting advice about the best way to proceed. As I mentioned, all applicants should stay tuned with regards to what's happening with DACA and the Supreme Court. As I mentioned, we're anticipating a decision in the summer of 2020. But if anything happens or anything changes in their respective situations, maybe they get married, or maybe there's some other factors that change for them personally. Maybe they've been arrested or victimized and the victim of a crime. These are all things that could potentially impact their immigration status, both positively and negatively, and they should always speak to a reputable legal services provider. Unfortunately, there's a lot of fraud, there's a lot of notarios, there's a lot of non-attorneys that are providing advice to people about immigration situations that may not be the best. So they need to make sure that they're getting quality legal advice. And as mentioned, if any circumstances change in their case, they should definitely get another consultation. Our goal here, DACA is a stopgap. DACA is not a permanent solution. DACA is not the best option for a lot of people. And we really want to get people on a pathway to permanency, a pathway to a green card and eventual citizenship. So if we can do anything to identify some sort of relief that will get them there, we want to make sure that we're doing it sooner rather than later.